So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar called Thinking About Your Future, a Career Conversation Guide. So, I don't know how many of you have come on here to think about your own future and how many of you have come on because we all know that we need to get our managers to have good career conversations with their colleagues. So either way, I hope you find lots of benefit in this, and maybe you'll find benefit from both perspectives. So as before, about 30 minutes, we're going to talk, 25 minutes, and then I will open up and we can have a more free-flowing, open conversation. So very briefly, for those of you who don't know us, here are some of our clients. Some of you will see your names on there, which is fabulous, the names of your employers. We tend to work with organisations where people have promoted their managers on the basis of their technical, academic or professional expertise, and not necessarily because they've got great people skills. So that's the basics of how we work, and we work across multiple sectors. So here's what I'm going to share today. We're going to think about the idea of thinking about the future before we think about career conversations. And we have discovered that working with people to talk about the future before you talk about what do you want to do in your career, where do you want to be in 5 years' time, is a much more valuable way to start the conversation. We're then going to think a little bit about how we might coach and develop some strengths and skills. We're going to think about motivating people to think more broadly. And then I'm going to share with you a section from the book, which has got the career conversation guide in it. The book is my book, which was published, hooray, hooray, last summer. So we'll talk a little bit about that. All right, but maybe it's worth thinking briefly about the changing nature of our work. So here is just a very simple list of jobs that didn't exist 20 years ago. Maybe your job didn't exist 20 years ago, or maybe some of these things are changing your job. So for many of us who are working in HR, you know, the role of being an HR data scientist or an HR data analyst didn't exist 20 years ago. There wasn't really the data to analyze. So even though many of these jobs are quite technical, they're not all technical. You can also see things like diversity manager and head of culture. These roles didn't exist either. So what we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about careers and we're helping our colleagues to think about careers is to think about the future. So here are some questions. All right, so what's changing in your profession and what are the implications for you? So I've put up some quite big questions addressed to you, but obviously these are slides that you would get your managers to use. So are you doing one of those jobs that actually won't exist in the future? Will your function even still exist? So if any of you work in the legal sector, you know, there's a lot of talk around how much of the work that's done by paralegals now can be done, not just outsourced to other places to be done more cheaply, but actually done quite significantly through technology using artificial intelligence. You know, thinking about what skills or knowledge are you now expected to have that you weren't expected to have some time ago. So, for example, in HR, which many of you are from, there's a huge requirement to be much more numerate and much more analytical, and also have a much broader scope around understanding behaviour, around talking about the challenges of diversity, inclusion and equality, which if you entered the profession in the 1990s or the early noughties was simply not there. So this creates a lot of implications, but it also raises some questions for yourself to think about. What actually are you bringing? Because if you are simply bringing a set of knowledge and skills that is getting outdated, maybe you have to face up to some challenges. But maybe you're bringing some strengths that will continue to have value in the future, and what can you do to play with them? So I wonder how you feel about those questions. Do you feel anxious? Maybe looking at those questions, do you feel excited? Do you feel overwhelmed? Maybe you feel hopeful. I wonder if it's worth just taking a moment, and I'm going to stop the share and open up the chat so I can see the chat too. I wonder if any of you would just like to write what you think in chat, what you think your colleagues or you feel when you think about the future of your profession and you think about careers, what does that mean? Do even having those thoughts make you feel, oh no, how am I going to keep up? Or do you think your managers are feeling, oh no, all these young people are coming in with skills that I don't have. How am I going to keep up? Do I feel threatened? What do you think that you or maybe your colleagues are feeling when they think about the future, which is not what they're feeling when they think about their careers, perhaps? So if you've got any thoughts on that, let's get some thoughts in chat. So I'm going to put one up. So I can easily feel quite overwhelmed at the scale of change. So if you've got some thoughts, here we go. That's great. Thanks for putting some of those up. So if you've put those for everybody, Michael, I think frightened and excited at the same time is really, you know, it's that dichotomy, isn't it? It's that fight or fright, you know, flight or fright moment. Do I stand here going, oh no, or do I think, wow, all this potential? Bally, that's lovely to hear that you're excited and hopeful. You know, really lots and lots of challenges for us all in thinking about how we feel. So when you're asking people, I'm just going to put myself on speaker view because Helen has told me that that works better. But that's not bringing me out on speaker view from my screen. So I'm going to go back to the screen share, but we're going to talk a little bit about how we feel here. So when you are having a conversation about careers and the future, you need to think from your colleagues' perspective about how they are feeling. And that can often be a really useful conversation to have before you start on the what do you want to do next year. So as we know, many career conversations happen kind of at the end of an appraisal where we turn around and we go, all right, so we've talked about your objectives, we've talked about your development, now let's talk about what are your career thoughts. This happens in a rush at the end of a traditional appraisal. It's really helpful if you can structure your performance conversations through the year so that one conversation is able to be about the future. And it might be about what's changing in the organization. It might be about what's changing in your function. It might be about what's changing in your profession or even in your sector. So we need to think about how our colleagues are feeling, and maybe we need to develop some coaching conversations to help them recognize those feelings and yet be able to talk to them. And often when people go to life coaches outside corporate work, they get those kinds of questions. They get a life coach who will ask them and talk them through, how do you feel about these things? What are you feeling about the future? What are you looking at? So dealing with that underlying emotion. But you could put some very simple coaching questions into your career conversations at work that will help people recognize these feelings and then deal with them. But it's not only the colleague who's got feelings, is it? I think that a manager also has feelings. So if you're the manager having some thoughts, what thoughts are you having? Maybe when you're having a career conversation, a manager is thinking, golly, I don't want to lose this person. You know, I really, really don't want to lose this person at all. Or maybe you're thinking, I wish this colleague would just go. I'll tell them anything. If they would apply for another job and leave, that would be fantastic. Or maybe you're thinking, oh, I wish I had this colleague's choices. All of those opportunities weren't open to me, or I don't have the skills that they've got, or I wish that I was able to do what they could do. Or maybe you're thinking, are they threatening to leave? And we had one client early on in the workspace in 3C where they wouldn't hold career conversations with their people because they were worried that people would then hold a gun to their head and be saying things like, you know, if you think I'm so great and you think I've got good career opportunities, I want that now. And of course, what happened was they lost a lot of colleagues because they weren't having career conversations. Helen, I'm getting some background noise. If you could just pop on mute all, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So what I was saying was, in your work as helping managers, what you need to do is to be encouraging your managers to think about how they feel about having the career conversation and explore their own emotions about how they feel with a career conversation before they even sit down and talk to their colleague. So I've just put up a very tiny little worked example here, and I'm aware our time is bouncing on, as it always does in this. So I've just worked through. So let's think about a bank cashier. All right, so this is a very easy example, a public example that we can all see in front of us. So if I was having a career conversation with a bank cashier, many of whom have been doing that job for more than a decade, I would be asking, you know, will your role still exist? Now, we only have to look around us to know that many front desk bank cashier roles are simply disappearing. Will they all go? I don't know. What's going to be the shift between face-to-face contact and back office contact, you know, chat style contact or front desk contact? We don't know that, but we do know those roles are reducing. Is our function going to exist? If you work for Monzo or you work for Revolut or you work for Starling, there are no front desk roles. There are some people interfacing with customers, but they work in a different way. So having some thoughts around what's happening around that role in the new world is really important. Maybe everything's going into a contact center. So then my front desk cashier needs to think, is that the same knowledge? Maybe that's using some of my knowledge, but it's going to leave me feeling de-skilled. Maybe it's going to improve what my choices are. I don't know. Maybe the change is being driven by customers. Therefore, I need to think about for myself, if customers are really changing the work that I do, nothing my organization is going to do is going to stop that. Therefore, what do I need to know? So you could have this conversation. Now, clearly, some of your people are more sophisticated in their understanding of their sector, and some of them will be less sophisticated. Some of them will think that their work is never going to change, and others of them will think that it's obviously changing. But equipping or skilling your people to think about the future is really, really important, and giving them some context, especially some of your longer serving employees who will say, everything's always changing, but I've been doing this job for 20 years. And actually, there's always going to be a reception desk in this hospital. So I never need to learn anything new, really, is one of the things that will, A, reduce productivity in your organization, but will also prevent them from making the most of themselves. So what does that mean? We need to understand the difference between strengths and skills. So on the left-hand side, I put an example. So maybe somebody has a strength in numeracy, right? If you are numerate, and the more numerate you are, that is always applicable in a huge range of jobs. More and more jobs are requiring people to be numerate. Therefore, it's a strength that I can apply in lots of different sectors. It may not be a strength in what I would call classic strengths coaching, that it's what you love to do, it's what you're brilliant at doing, it's what energizes you, it's what gets you up in that morning. But being numerate is a strength that is applicable in lots of situations. But skills fade, and I put up here, I was amazed to find this, the old punch hole cards for computer programming. Wow, I never learned to do this. I don't know if any of you did. But we used to program computers in the 70s by punching holes in cards and feeding them into machines. And of course, that has completely gone. And anybody who works in the tech sector will know that skill fade and skills become obsolete really, really fast. So here are some suggested coaching questions which we can use to help people think about what they might want to do in the future. So they're strengths-based and they're skills-based. So there are two strengths-based questions which I'm finding are really helpful. One is, what strengths help you to do your best work? And that is helping people think around when they do their best work, what's actually happening, what's going on for them, what are they using, what are they applying? And the other thing to do is, especially if people have been through quite a lot of challenge in the last year, maybe they feel they've stagnated and not moved on. Maybe they feel that they've had loads thrown at them and they've had to cope in very different ways. But to explore with people what strengths have enabled them to cope, maybe with having to suddenly work from home, maybe with having a role change, maybe with having a new manager, whatever they've had to deal with in the past, how did they cope with that? And to think about, is that a strength that will then help me deal with the future, especially for people who are feeling overwhelmed or anxious or stressed? thinking about the strengths that got them through the past may help them in the future. Now, then we look at skills. Which of your skills seem to have long-term value, and what new skills might you need? And there are some lovely books around here. So the book around What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Many people end up in a role where often they find it quite difficult to perform because they're still operating in the way that worked in their previous role, and they haven't been able to step up with the new skills that are needed in a new role. Now, at executive level, people might get executive coaching, they might get development, but for the vast majority of people in an organization, they're quite often put into new roles because they've got some technical skills and maybe not given the support around the other skills they need. So addressing those skills gaps is really, really important when you're helping people think about the future. And the other thing is that if you've got people sitting in your career conversations who are going, no, I'm very happy, I'm doing what I'm doing really well, you might challenge them with thinking around what skills they need to just stay still. So how do we build all of that into a conversation? So this is a little template from the book. Those who've got the book will know that it is. So the whole of the way the book is structured is into 15 different conversations, each of which has some ideas for how to open it up, some ideas for questions for the middle, but absolutely crucially, and I say this in the book, some ideas around closing and finishing the conversation. And one of the challenges with the career conversations is they often aren't finished. So I'm not going to read through all of this because you can all read it perfectly well, but it's about encouraging people to think around what's changing and what are the options, as well as to think about some specifics around, just think around 3 years. But there's a lovely question at the bottom of that beginning one. If you knew you would succeed or that you couldn't fail, what role would you choose to do? And for many of your people who are perhaps in that emotional space of feeling anxious or stressed or overwhelmed, encouraging them to put aside those fears and then think about what they might like to do could open up some possibilities for how they might get there. And then finally, at the other end, when people are talking about careers, it's very easy for you, if you're the manager and they're the colleague, to have, oh, wouldn't it be great if? Why don't you try these questions, particularly around getting them to think, using a scale, how hard would it be to get there? Or in addition, using the question, what would it mean for you to take the first step? And helping people, again, explore the emotion, which we haven't got time to do, but having explored the emotion about how they feel about the present, encouraging them to think about the emotion around how they feel about the future, what it would mean to them to make that career step, what it would mean to them to acquire that new skill, how they would feel when they've done it, would be a big thing. Some years ago at 3C, we did a lot of work on the introduction of NVQs, and we did a lot of work measuring the impact of NVQs, especially with people very much at the bottom of the workforce in relatively low skilled jobs. And what we found was one of the biggest benefits of NVQs was not that people acquired skills they didn't have, but that they were recognized and that it meant a huge amount to them to have those skills that they did have recognized. And thinking about that as giving people confidence to move on is a really, really powerful tool to use in a career conversation. So finally, here's a little guide to help people move from my ideals of thinking into, so what am I going to do? And this little toolkit's really simple, but the principle of this toolkit is to think about more than one role. So one of the challenges in organizations, especially if it's a relatively small organization, is you go, oh, that's the next job you can get, as if that's the only one you can get. And this activity is to encourage people to think that maybe there are 2, 3, 4 roles where they could move next, which might open up different opportunities, and to use this to work through with them what they might need to do. And so different roles might make different challenges of them. For example, in one role, I might need to show that I've got a certain set of skills, to show that I've got a certain level of maturity. That might be different in a different role. For example, the one I've put show I can handle responsibility and learn more about managing budgets. But maybe The role is to show that I'm better able to make connection with people, that my ability to network outside the organization is more powerful, that my own confidence in dealing with senior people is more powerful. And then showing people, all right, what are some steps I can do, and putting some dates in, because we all know once we've got dates, we can move forward. But then the final thing, which is about the emotion, how will achieving this role matter to me, right? And one of the values that the emotions that I didn't put up at the beginning, but is a huge, powerful driver of career movers, is if people are bored. If people feel bored or stuck, and you as a manager can't do much more to give them some job enrichment or job enhancement or some more interest in their role, that is the moment at which they really, really, really need to move. Because if they don't move, then almost certainly their productivity, their motivation, their engagement will start to reduce. So we're coming near to the end of the share. The book's here. I've got some 5-star reviews. Thank you, Mariam, for saying that you're enjoying it. In the book, there are 15 other conversations which cover everything from setting goals to poor performance. So do go and have a look at it. It's available at Amazon, Waterstones, and all good bookshops. I will now stop the share.